The story of the Crusades does not begin with knights in armor or popes thundering from their pulpits. It begins far earlier in a land of burning deserts and wandering tribes. Arabia. Imagine it. The 6th century. The Arabian Peninsula was a vast, unforgiving world of shifting dunes and rocky highlands. Camels groaned under the weight of trade caravans that snaked their way to Damascus, Petra, and the markets of Byzantium. Tribes ruled the desert, each bound not by nation or empire, but by blood and honor. The sword and the spear were the law, and vengeance was a duty passed from father to son. Religion here was many things and nothing at once. The Kaaba in Mecca stood as a sanctuary, filled with idols of countless gods, tribal deities, echoes of Christianity, whispers of Judaism, and shadows of Zoroastrian fire. Arabia was a crossroads, but one without unity. And into this world, in the year 570, a child was born, Muhammad ibn Abdullah. Before we continue, kindly hit the subscribe button and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comment section. It is always awesome sharing history with you. Now, let's begin. He grew up orphaned, a boy who knew both poverty and the dust of caravans. He worked as a merchant, traveling the roads of Arabia, listening to the chants of Christian monks in the desert, the prayers of Jews in Yathrib, and the rituals of his own pagan kin. Something restless stirred in him, something that the idols of Mecca could not answer. At the age of 40, in the solitude of a cave outside Mecca, that restlessness erupted into revelation. He returned with a message. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger. The world of Arabia trembled. His words carried the rhythm of prophecy, the fire of judgment, the promise of unity. He called it Islam, submission to God, and with it came a new vision of community, the Ummah. No longer tribe against tribe, blood against blood, but one people under one God. Not everyone welcomed it. The merchants of Mecca feared their idols, their business, their prestige would collapse. Persecution followed, but Muhammad and his followers endured, and in 622 they fled to Yathrib, a migration called the Hijra. From that small city, renamed Medina, Islam began its ascent. Here, Muhammad was not just a preacher, but a lawgiver, a judge, a commander. His followers fought battles not only to survive, but to proclaim their faith. At Badr, at Uhud, at the Trench, they learned what it meant to fight in the name of God. Victory was not merely military, it was spiritual. Every sword stroke was framed as part of a greater struggle, Jihad. And here the seed was planted. Jihad, in its first meaning, was the striving of the soul, the inner struggle to live rightly before God. But in its outward form, it became the struggle to defend and expand the realm of Islam. By the time Muhammad died in 632, Arabia, once fractured into tribes, was united under his message. The tribes who once feuded over wells and camels now marched together, their banners marked with the name of Allah. And they did not stop. The desert that had confined them now became a launching pad. Muhammad's successors, the caliphs, carried his mission beyond Arabia. Syria, Egypt, Mesopotamia, all were soon touched by the fire of Islam's advance. The Byzantines, heirs of Rome, watched in disbelief as provinces they had held for centuries slipped away in a matter of years. To the Muslims, it was the will of God. To the Christians, it was the beginning of an existential nightmare. When Muhammad died in 632, the desert should have swallowed his movement. Arabia had never birthed an empire. Great powers rose in Mesopotamia, Persia, and Rome. Never in the sands of Hijaz. Yet against every expectation, Islam did not die with its prophet. It ignited. The caliphs who succeeded him, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, were not kings in jeweled palaces. They were men of prayer and steel, commanders who knelt with their soldiers before dawn and rode at their head into battle by day. To them, conquest was not plunder. It was mission. The world was divided into two spheres, the Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, where God's law reigned, and the Dar al-Harb, the House of War, the lands of unbelief, where Islam must one day prevail. And so the storm began. In 636, at the Battle of Yarmouk, Muslim armies met the might of Byzantium. The clash lasted for days, dust choking the air, the sun beating down on exhausted men, the Christian banners of the cross facing warriors shouting Allahu Akbar. When it ended, the Byzantines were shattered. Syria, the jewel of their empire, lay open. Within a year, Damascus had fallen. Jerusalem followed in 637. The patriarch Sophronius, weary and surrounded, handed the keys of the holy city to Caliph Umar himself. And in an act that astonished the Christians, Umar refused to pray in the church of the Holy Sepulchre, fearing his followers would seize it. Instead, he prayed outside, laying the foundation for what would become the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The message was clear. Islam had come not only as conqueror, but as custodian of God's holy places. Then came Egypt, the land of the Nile, breadbasket of empires. In 641, Alexandria fell, and with it, Byzantium's last hope of holding the East. From the deserts of Arabia, Islam now commanded two of the ancient world's greatest cities, Damascus and Alexandria. But the tide did not stop. To the east, the Sassanid Empire, ancient Persia, proud and unyielding, faced the Muslim advance. In 636, at the Battle of Qadisiyah, Arab horsemen broke the Persian army. By 651, the Sassanid Shahs were gone, their fire temples extinguished, their empire absorbed into the caliphate. From Arabia to Persia, from Syria to Egypt. In a single generation, the map of the world was redrawn, and the warriors pressed further. Across North Africa, they rode with the wind, sweeping aside what remained of Byzantine garrisons. Berber tribes converted, joined the ranks, and carried the Crescent ever westward. By 711, Muslim armies crossed the narrow strait into Spain. At the Battle of Guadalete, they crushed the Visigothic kingdom, and the land they called Al-Andalus was born. To the Christian West, this was a thunderclap. The faith of Muhammad, scarcely a century old, now stretched from the Indus River to the Atlantic Ocean, from the steppes of Central Asia to the mountains of Iberia. No faith, no empire, had ever expanded so far, so fast. Imagine the shock. A monk in Rome hears of Spain's fall. A Byzantine soldier returning from Syria sees lands once Roman now filled with mosques. Christian pilgrims whisper that Jerusalem, the city of Christ's passion, is no longer theirs. For Muslims, this was proof of God's favor. Victory followed victory, and each triumph was a sign that the Ummah, united in faith, was destined to inherit the earth. For Christians, it was a nightmare without end. The crescent had risen, and it cast a long shadow over the cross. The expansion of Islam was like the desert wind, sudden, fierce, unstoppable. What had begun in the sands of Arabia now stretched across 3 continents. For the first time in centuries, the great powers of the world were no longer Rome and Persia. Persia was dead, Byzantium was bleeding, and a new power, a faith forged in the desert, was at the gates. Yet not all empires collapse at once. Byzantium, though battered, was not finished. Constantinople, the city of Constantine, queen of the Bosphorus, stood as a fortress between east and west. Its walls, thick as mountains, had defied armies for centuries. Its domes, glittering with gold mosaics, proclaimed the triumph of Christendom. If Rome had fallen to the barbarians, Constantinople remained the last guardian of Christian empire, and now it would be tested. In 674, the Muslim fleet, the Crescent upon the sea, struck at Constantinople. For years they laid siege, their ships crowding the waters of the Bosphorus, their warriors encamped along the city's mighty walls. The Byzantines, desperate and ingenious, unveiled a weapon that turned the tide: Greek fire, a liquid that burned even on water, shot from tubes like the breath of dragons. Muslim ships ignited in the night, their crews swallowed by fire. For the first time, the expansion faltered. But the storm was not over. Decades later, in 717, another great siege thundered against the city. Again the Arabs came, and again they were beaten back by famine, by winter's cruelty, and by the relentless defense of Constantinople's walls. The Crescent had swept across empires, but here, before the Queen of Cities, it found its limit. For Christendom, it was a breath of relief. Constantinople still stood, and with it, hope that Islam's advance might be contained. Yet the relief was temporary, for though Byzantium survived, its land shrank with each passing generation. Asia Minor bled. Syria was gone forever. Jerusalem, the holy city, was now a memory. And while Byzantium held the line in the east, the west faced its own storm. Across the mountains of Gaul, Frankish knights heard whispers. The Muslims were not only in Spain, they were marching north. At Tours in 732, Charles Martel, the Hammer, met them. The clash was brutal. Muslim cavalry, swift as the desert wind, thundered against the wall of Frankish infantry. Steel clashed, men cried out, and in the chaos, the Muslim advance broke. Europe had found its savior, if only for a time. To the Christians, Tours was no mere battle, it was a sign. God had spared them. To the Muslims, it was a skirmish, a momentary check in a vast expansion that still stretched across oceans and deserts. Yet whether great or small, the victories of Constantinople and Tours became legend. Stories spread through monasteries and villages. The new faith was powerful, but not invincible. Still, the fear lingered. The Holy Land, the very soil where Christ had walked, was gone. Pilgrims returning from Jerusalem whispered that the city was in Muslim hands, its churches overshadowed by the rising dome of the rock. For Christians in the West, this was an unbearable wound, one that would fester until it demanded blood. The stage was set. The Crescent had risen high. The cross waited in silence, and soon, the world would erupt in holy war.